Hello, Thaddeus. It's Thursday, August 30th, unlike the video would have been from yesterday, and I would have been lying to you. But I deleted most of that footage because it wasn't very good. Mostly yesterday was an awful, no good, terrible, horrible, awful day, and nothing good ever really came of it. In fact, even free pie couldn't do anything to make the day better, because really, pie happiness is transitory. You start off with, yay!
This is my pie. It will be delicious and go in my mouth.
And then at the end of it, you're all like, aww.
Oh, my pie is gone.
No, I'm done.
This is tragically sad.
So you go from being happy, and then you're sad again. So really, there's no positive effect, especially if you were upset to start with, because nothing was going right the entire day. I was going to talk about how much I hated Todd Akin, and I really don't like Todd Akin. I even had a little skit planned. Like, here's the level of people who hate Todd Akin, because he's a Republican. And at this level, you get an I Hate Todd Akin mug. Then there's the level for people who hate Todd Akin because he's an awful human being. About right there. And at this donation level, you get a bumper sticker and the I Hate Todd Akin mug. Then there's the level that I hate Todd Akin. And at this level, you get an I Hate Todd Akin tote bag. If there's one thing I've learned from NPR and PBS, it's that liberals love tote bags. So your video inspired me to talk about something more interesting than how much I dislike a politician. Because let's be honest, it's an election season. MSNBC and Fox News have the I hate these politicians covered. A few things at first. The test. I passed it, but that's mainly because I already knew the answer. I'd seen it before. But I did learn something from it. Now, there was one thing I didn't know. And so I went onto the internets. It's pronounced Wason. But I think the Wason selection test has a very important role in our discussion about how we treat science in this country. Often the reason people are getting it wrong is because they want to prove the positive. They want to prove themselves right. It's not about proving yourself wrong. But that is, in fact, the very gist of how science works. Scientists are continually trying to prove themselves wrong. In fact, one of the most famous science experiments of all time was a massive failure, the Michelson-Morley experiment. Their success at proving themselves wrong and thus proving that the aether didn't exist paved the way for special relativity. The very fact that we can communicate from halfway around the world owes itself to their failure. And that's what science is, having a hypothesis and then thinking of every possible way that you could prove that wrong, and then failing to prove yourself wrong. After you've come up with every conceivable way that you could be wrong, tested it, and failed to be wrong, then you have a scientific theory. And I think really, we should spend more time explaining the fact that science is about being wrong, or failing to be wrong. It's never about proving yourself right, because you can't ever really prove yourself right. There always could be some way that you are wrong that you haven't thought of. And that's why scientists continuously test, and test some more, because they're always trying to find a new and amazing way to prove themselves wrong. So when you think about it, failure not being an option is a terrible idea for science. Failure is the best option, because then you have to come up with an entirely new idea of how the universe works. And an entirely new idea of how the universe works gets us into space. It puts satellites in orbit around the planet. It allows you to make phone calls to the other side of the planet. It means you can navigate in your car with a GPS. It has the potential to allow for time travel. These are all great things that now exist because somebody proved themselves wrong. So, in thinking about all this science and what science was and what it wasn't about failures and all of that, I came up with a question that I think you should answer. Now, it takes a little prefacing, but I think this is right up your alley of space and space travel. When going to another planet, I mean, Alpha Centauri is way the hell away. It's going to take a few light years to get there. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. I could look it up, but I'm not going to, because you can do that if you really care. So can the studio audience. It's on Wikipedia. So, here's the thing. If you're on the first ship is slow compared to, say, the next ship. The next ship could be pretty fast. Say it's got a better drive, it's going to get there beforehand. It will overtake the first ship. So that means if you're on the first ship, you're going to get there second. Being there second has some implications. For one, the first people should have already done all the work in setting up the base. Maybe even inhabiting most of the planet by the time you get there. Now, the second ship should know that you are going to arrive later. They should even know the exact date. So conceivably, unless they're jerks, they're going to have already set up a place for you to stay. But there's a problem with this. When you think about it, let's say that second ship left 100 years after the first ship. You're going to be pretty far behind if you're a scientist. Basically, all your skills are useless. 100 years ago, in 1912, that was the first time somebody decided to bomb something out of an airplane. The Titanic sank that year. And just 49 years after that, in 61, Yuri Gagarin was in space. And 2 years after Yuri, Valentina Terrakovich was in space. The first woman. That's before some countries let women vote. And then in '69, we put a man on the moon. So in a little over 50 years, we went from bombing people to being on the moon. Now we have people teleporting particles. So when you think about it, if that first ship is full of scientists, what was the point? They're basically going to have to go back to elementary school. So for me, when you think about it, first ship should be full of humanities major, artists, writers, architects, people who are in a field that's essentially timeless. And you look at books. We had books 100 years ago. We read those books. We discuss those books. They still have meaning that is relevant to our lives and who we are as human beings. We study old architecture. We emulate old architecture. We still have Doric, Corinthian, and Ionic columns on a lot of buildings. We admire Gothic cathedrals and mosques. We still look at paintings from hundreds of years ago. Greek art. We have Greek art in our museums. And you think about language. We've had language since humanity. It's one of our greatest achievements is the ability to use a language, to record that language. And even before language, we still had storytelling. The oral tradition is a long-standing tradition since the beginning of humanity. So when you think about it, that first ship should be full of people who are going to be useful to this new society. Writers and artists are going to have a unique perspective. They're 100 years out of date too, but the difference is you now have writers and artists who have 100 years worth of difference to deal with. It's a benefit. He adds value to the society because of that perspective that the people already there can't have. So the question here is, would you want to be on that first ship or the second ship? Thaddeus, I will see you in the future.